Now, good parenting is one of the ways to raise a healthy, balanced society. Earlier this week, we spoke to a brain neurofeedback therapist. Today, we speak to a clinical psychologist about parenting that will not breed negative behavior. For example, in Limpopo, a young man is facing charges of murder after he allegedly killed a 59-year-old. It was all part of a game called Drop Ditopi, which translates to drop an elderly man. Let's find out if parenting has anything to do with this from a clinical psychologist, Dr. Mfundo. Doctor, good morning and thank you very much for your time. You know, when I was just reading that story of that teen boy and his friends who invented a game where they just randomly assault old men, it honestly says we're in need of a serious intervention as a country. What are we to read into the violence that we're seeing and the perpetrators being so young of late?
You know, there's an African proverb that says, it takes a whole community to raise a child. And it's quite true because when parents fail to raise their children, you often see people who all play a good role in their children's lives and raise them in a way that they're quite mature and they fit into society and they actually add value to society. It's quite true because when parents are not there, you usually find grandparents and school teachers and social workers or just people of the community step in to teach them the right values. But as a community, we've become isolated from each other. We turn a blind eye when we hear the neighbors fighting or GBV happening. And we know very well that in those certain circumstances, there's kids in those homes watching these things happen. And then they learn violence at a very early age, and they learn they learn to join gangs or a group where they have a sense of belonging. But how they gain purpose is through things that are completely deviant in society.
We often hear, particularly with the MEC for Education, because of late you would find the MEC for Education rushing to a school for counseling session, rushing to a family to extend his condolences, not the ordinary things we expect of an MEC for Education. And often we hear that this level of violence that we're seeing in school is a reflection of society. But the parents themselves, when they hear of the things that their children have done, they're also in utter disbelief. And really, there's often never an opportunity to think that to a certain extent, maybe there's a role we could have played. Is it really fair to say that the parents could have had a role in what a child becomes if they display violence in school?
In some cases, the child can be heavily influenced by their peers, and perhaps because they take substances, maybe they'll then steal or join a gang because it's cool and to keep up the habit. But in most cases, you find that when children behave in such extreme manners to the point of murdering an elderly geriatric man just to be part of a game, that's when you know that that person has had a lot of abuse or is distant from their parents. Perhaps there's some secrets they're keeping from their parents. Maybe they've been raped, bullied, certain things that have happened to them that have caused them to be that way. But it's very rare that the parenting style can't be faulted in some way when it comes to a child acting up. And in those cases where the parents have been present, they have been they're supporting the child has very low confidence and they've gotten into a really bad gang where they gain a sense of belonging, or they're trying to support a drug habit. So the parents can be faulted, but sometimes it is actually just the peer pressure and influence the child has.
And then how much of a role does a distant parent play in their child's upbringing or what they then display in school? Because we spoke to a neurofeedback therapist on Tuesday, I believe, and they stated that it causes a lot of harm if we don't show affection to our children, hug them, affirm them. They can either display one of two characters. One where they're very violent or one where they're extremely reserved and have no boundaries. And this goes on well into adulthood, where these children will allow themselves to be abused in friendships, by colleagues, and even in love relationships.
It definitely does play a role, especially in the early stages. So from when the baby's growing in the mother's womb, how angry the mother is, how the state of mind the mother is, if they're in an abusive relationship with their partner. All of those emotions do get sensed by the unborn fetus. And even after birth, like if the mother doesn't make eye contact with the child, doesn't breastfeed or have kangaroo chest on chest, it has a huge impact on how the child's mind gets programmed early on. So I would say between the ages of 1 and 9, the parents play a very pivotal role. But when we're now heading towards the ages of 12, between 12 and all the way up to 19 or 18, that's when the community plays a huge role, because the community can, if they're growing up in a violent community or they're in a school with a lot of violence, that exposure can undo all the good work a parent has put in. So it is definitely the microsystem, but also the macro system has a huge influence on how a child turns out.
How do you empower parents who want to be more affectionate, want to be part of the conscious parenting that we keep hearing about, but they themselves were not parented in that way? How do you empower such parents who want to be better than what maybe their parents were?
I think it's important for them to actually work through their childhood traumas, because you won't be able to nurse your own child that you've given birth to if you haven't been able to heal and nurse your inner child that has received abuse or grown up in maybe not the best community or the best home environment. So you can only give what you've gotten, and it's important to do a lot of self-work, which is very difficult, to get to the point where you can actually give love and support and be the parent that you never had.
So it's that whole phrase of many saying we now need to reparent ourselves. Our parents, of course, loved us, but they possibly would have done a few things wrong, especially with firstborns. So you're saying it is important to become the parents we never had through reparenting.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, Samgelsiwe, for your time this morning. That was Dr. Samgelsiwe Mthembu, a clinical psychologist.